I will say the vast majority of Democrats are pro-law enforcement. And we believe that law enforcement...
He says they're Gestapo.
Let me finish.
He says they're Gestapo.
Scott,
do you agree?
Scott...
Hey guys, I'm Mike. And in this video, we're taking a look at what turned into a pretty revealing moment on Abby Phillip's CNN show. Scott Jennings found himself under real pressure during a discussion about the tragedy in Minneapolis, and instead of engaging seriously, things quickly went off the rails. We're gonna watch clips from this heated panel, which also included Ana Navarro, and then I'll share my thoughts on what this says about the broader MAGA messaging we keep seeing. Before we get into it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. It's always good to see people from all over the world jumping into these conversations. Let's watch the clip together.
Ana Navarro has joined us at the table. Ana, there were a lot of people who warned that, a massive increase in ICE presence on the ground would inevitably result in American citizens being the victims of some of these encounters.
Yeah, to me this day is very, very somber because I think there were so many indications that this was going to end up happening sooner or later. And it's a day where I think we need to be very sober. And I think, a few things. First, we live in America. We have a right to protest. We have a right to videotape what is happening and amplify the truth. But for the videos that were taken today, we wouldn't know the truth and we wouldn't be seeing it with our own eyes and able to judge it. Also, I think it's negligent that the ICE forces have been increased so quickly and that there's people without the proper training and the proper experience. I don't know if this agent who shot this woman today, I don't know if he's one of the new recruits that got offered $50,000 and maybe has less training and experience than ICE agents regularly do. And that might have been a contributing factor to how this ended up. Maybe if it had been an agent with more experience, the response would have been different. What I do know is that there's a 6-year-old boy who's now orphaned. His father died in 2023, and today his mother got shot to death. And I think it's a time of reflection in America. Protesters need to be peaceful. Protesters have every right to show up and demand accountability. But I also think our government has to be responsible in who they put out in the streets armed and the tone of what's happening with ICE. We've seen some agents really abuse power and almost relish what they are doing. We have seen pregnant women dragged through the streets. We have seen children left alone in cars. We have seen people shot. We have seen people chased like animals. Look, it's a very difficult situation, and we've got to reflect on how we do this so that it doesn't continue happening.
As you mentioned, it did seem to some people that we were headed in this direction because a couple of months ago, there was an incident involving another shooting with ICE agents. They shot into a vehicle and shot a woman. Then they charged her with trying to ram the law enforcement, but those charges were dismissed by a judge in part because of contradictory evidence that contradicted the ICE account of what happened in that incident. And I think all of this, to Anna's point, raises questions, Michael, for me, about this pact that we have between law enforcement and the citizenry, that under normal circumstances, when you get a badge and a gun, it's a huge amount of responsibility. And that responsibility also comes with, you show your face, you're accountable, you report to someone. And you also have, you have rules that you abide by. And that feels like the part that's missing here with ICE, that they've decided ICE agents don't need to show their faces. They don't need to abide by some of the basic principles that regular law enforcement officers do, even though they're engaging with the population at much greater degrees than they used to. Is it a moment to think about that and think about whether that is sustainable?
I'm sure I'm not opposed to having conversations about extended training. Look, if one wants to raise questions about shortening training, if you're going to have agents who don't typically act in law enforcement roles. I would not be opposed to that from my experience with law enforcement, broadly speaking. But even with well-trained officers, we have seen instances where officers have to make split decisions. And sometimes it's not nice. We shouldn't jump to conclusions by calling this guy a murderer. We don't know yet. We have no clue.
So this is one of those things that the right always falls back on, right? Well, you know, they had to make split-second decisions. Split-second decisions. But that excuse really starts to fall apart when you actually look at what happened here. Because there's video out there showing a guy on the scene, a man who says he's a doctor, asking if he can at least check the woman's pulse after she'd been shot. And he's not allowed through. He's stopped. That's not a split-second decision. That's a choice. There are also reports, and I believe this came from Fox 9 Inches Minneapolis, that an ambulance did arrive, but ICE vehicles were blocking access and medical aid couldn't immediately get to her. Again, that's not split second. That's control of a scene after the fact. And then you've got Kristi Noem, who's overseeing all of this, coming out later and calling this woman a terrorist. That's definitely not a split-second decision. That's framing. That's narrative. That's political cover. Ana Navarro opens this segment doing exactly what you'd expect, calmly, rationally laying out why people are disturbed by what they're seeing from ICE right now and why accountability actually matters. And then, like clockwork, Scottjennings comes in ranting about Democrats being anti-law enforcement. But Americans aren't against law enforcement. They're against masked federal agents blocking doctors and paramedics from reaching someone who's dying after being shot. With actual law enforcement in this country, police departments, sheriffs, you don't get to stop medical professionals from rendering aid to someone you've just shot. That's not how this works. And people know that. Regular people know that. So when Scottjennings tries to turn this into, oh, Democrats hate cops, it just doesn't land, because what people are reacting to here isn't politics, it's basic humanity. And that's why Ana Navarro's argument resonates, and why the MAGA spin it falls flat.
Oh, that's difficult to say. Someone has died. I acknowledge that. There's a child who's lost another parent. That doesn't make me comfortable or as a human being at all. But I do believe you have to empower law enforcement officials to do their jobs while assuring that you're also protecting the constitutional rights of citizens. And that's just the way I look at this.
But this looked to me like there was something very wrong because, I mean, you know, this ICE officer shot at least 3 times that we could hear on the video with other ICE officers very close to the driver, with people all around the car, with a moving car situation happening, and which resulted into that car careening into another car and a tree, and could have caused even more death and injuries. So I think we've got to acknowledge all of those things. I saw earlier today the former mayor of Miami-Dade, Carlos Jimenez, who is now a Republican from South Florida, a congressman from South Florida, huge Trump supporter. But when he was mayor of Miami-Dade, and he's also been a fireman for over 20 years. When he was mayor of Miami-Dade, he was the chief executive of the police department. And Jake asked him how he felt about this. And he said, I'm not ready to defend the ICE officer. I have serious questions. And I think we need to take off our partisan hats, and we need to look at this with, be very cold-headed, because what we need to work on is make sure to avoid these kind of situations in the future.
Chris Murphy said Democrats cannot vote for a DHS budget that does not restrain the growing lawlessness of this agency. And increasingly, I'm hearing and seeing a lot of Democrats basically saying, back when defund ICE was a position that some liberals were taking and moderates were saying, well, that's gone too far. Now more and more so-called moderates are saying this agency is out of control. When we retake power, we've got to do something about it. Do you think that's the right move?
I think any agency that has this much money behind them needs to have accountability, and it doesn't have that. And I think if there's any question to what Shermichael's making and what Anna is saying, this idea of we don't really know what happened, we don't know what the officer was thinking in this moment, it might come down to training, it might not come down to training, it looks like this, it looks like that. At the end of the day, she was pulled out of the car and she was not dead yet. And a doctor was on the scene and tried to help her. And the ICE officer said, get away from her or we'll shoot you. So they shot a woman and then threatened to shoot a man who was trying to help the woman. So if you're telling me that this was just a split-second decision, she might have been saved. But her wife had to watch her bleed out on the ground while a doctor stood by with an ICE officer with a gun in his face. So I don't know what we're talking here.
In that aftermath.
Well, they've spoken to the doctor.
Right. No, yeah. And I think my point is that what transpired after she was shot, did they render aid? Did they allow aid to be rendered to her? Again, this is all part of the picture that Americans are seeing, and they're asking, what's going on here?
Well, they're all fair questions and should all be part of a legitimate investigation. I think that's what the American people would expect. I mean, a lot of people witnessed this. There have been a lot of witnesses on television today. We played some. I saw another interview with another witness who said that this lady in the van was the leader of a convoy that was attempting to impede and obstruct the road where legitimate law enforcement operations were taking place. I would also like to know if that is true, because that's what an eyewitness has said. If that is true, I think one of the questions we have to ask is, why are people believing that it is okay to create vehicle convoys for the purpose of impeding federal law enforcement? My suspicion is it's because they've been told by politicians that it is their responsibility to do so. It is, in fact, a felony to obstruct federal law enforcement activities. If you don't like the immigration laws, that's a legitimate position, but you don't change laws by creating convoys to obstruct law enforcement officers. You call the politicians and ask them to change the laws. Political vigilantism is getting people killed. This lady should not be dead. I hate it that she is dead, because this poor kid, as Anna said, is an orphan. I don't love in any way, shape, or form that someone is dead, but we have to ask ourselves hard questions about why people are putting themselves in these positions. And we've seen it all over the country.
Because they're
Abby.
Americans and they can't stand what they are seeing. I don't think it's.
Does that mean you can impede a law enforcement officer?
No, but that wasn't the case on January 6th either.
No
and they were
oversight.
pardoned. And just this week, they were marching down the street to the Capitol again. Why are you shaking your head?
Because
you
this cannot be your go-to.
But no, I'm not saying that.
On January 6th,
I am pro law enforcement.
Democrats said we're pro law enforcement. Today they say they're Gestapo. Which is it? Which is it?
No, I will say the vast majority of Democrats.
So here's the thing with what Scott Jennings is doing here. He keeps falling back on this idea that, well, you know, this was some kind of lawful operation, that ICE was just out there doing whatever it is they were legally allowed to do. But the reality is, we don't actually know that. We still don't have the full picture of what they were doing on that street at that moment. And that's important, because some of the people ICE has detained in operations like this have turned out to be American citizens. And in this case, the woman who was shot and killed was an American citizen. She wasn't undocumented. She wasn't an illegal alien like Scott Jennings and others keep implying when they talk around it. And that matters, because Scott Jennings keeps trying to blur this into some broader law enforcement under attack narrative, or compare it to things like Capitol Police responding to an insurrection. That's not the same situation. Not even close. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't a violent mob. This was ICE operating in a neighborhood, and someone ended up dead. And then there's the part where Scott just assumes everything the agents did was justified. We've been told different things by different officials. Local leaders have disputed the federal version of events. There's video out there that raises questions. And yet Scott Jennings just jumps straight to, well, obviously they were right. That's the disingenuous part. Because if we don't know exactly what happened, and we don't, then the last thing you should be doing is pretending it's all settled and beyond criticism. And this is where Ana Navarro is coming from. She's calmly laying out the accountability problem here, and Scott Jennings responds by ranting about Democrats hating law enforcement. That's not what this is about. Holding ICE accountable when someone dies isn't anti-police. It's basic accountability. Because in normal policing situations, you don't get to block doctors or paramedics from rendering aid to someone who's been shot. That's not how it works, and Americans know that. That's why people aren't buying Scott Jennings' framing here. But honestly, would we expect anything different from Scott Jennings? This is what he does. He spins, he smirks, he deflects. And he treats serious situations like this as just another talking point to defend MAGA no matter what the facts end up being.
Jennings.
Are pro law enforcement, and we believe that
Is
law
Tim Walz?
enforcement.
He says they're Gestapo.
Let me finish.
He says they're Gestapo.
Scott,
Do you agree?
Scott,
Do you
let
agree?
me finish. I do not agree. Let me
Good.
finish. Many Democrats, and the vast majority of them, are pro law enforcement. They believe that law enforcement should actually get the training that they deserve and they need. Hold on, I'm not done. Hold on.
You
Yes,
don't know
I
about
know.
this guy's
Let
training.
me tell you.
Stop
in
implying that he's not trained.
In Minnesota,
He was dragged by a car last
let me tell
summer.
you, in Minnesota, blocks from where this woman was killed was the George Floyd shooting. What happened at the time is the Justice Department entered a consent decree with the Minneapolis Police Department wanting to provide those law enforcement officers training so something like that would never happen again. And Donald Trump's administration completely dismissed that matter. And so now Minneapolis law enforcement officials are not getting the training that they need. Democratic Party is pro-law enforcement. They were pro-law enforcement on January 6th. They didn't issue those
They
pardons.
call them
They're
the Gestapo, Sochi.
They're pro-law
They call them
enforcement now,
murderers.
and
They
it
call
is-
them Nazis.
But why is it one rule for ICE, and why is it another rule for the Capitol Police or the Republican Party? Can you answer that question?
I have the same rule for all law enforcement. I think we should
But the
respect all law
administration
enforcement.
has two
you
rules.
all have
One-
select
I-
one
I
day a
guess
year.
one rule
One day
for
a year you
January
like the
6th
cops.
Well, look,
the other 364 days
listen,
you call them the Gestapo.
listen,
That's the
that's not-
Democratic
that
position.
is not the
Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second because this claim from Scott Jennings that Democrats only support law enforcement one day a year is just ridiculous. Who are these Democrats who are supposedly against law enforcement? What people are actually against is police brutality. They're against unarmed people being shot. They're against situations where ICE shoots someone and basic aid is blocked. Nobody is against law enforcement stopping real crimes. So this is just more disingenuousness from Scott Jennings. And honestly, it's not surprising. Ana Navarro, on the other hand, is being completely reasonable. She's saying what most people are thinking. We don't have all the facts yet, so you wait, you investigate, and you hold people accountable if necessary. That's how this is supposed to work. But Scott Jennings is going to defend ICE and this administration no matter what. We saw it immediately when Kristi Noem rushed out and labeled this woman a terrorist without even acknowledging that a human being died. No facts, no pause, no accountability. So let me know what you think. Are you on Scott Jennings' side here, or are you on the side of accountability and oversight like Ana Navarro and others on Abby Phillip's show? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found value in this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'm Mike, and I'll see you in the next one.